name's Dustin Trenton. Currently I'm an animation supervisor. I've been here 9 years, and Beast Wars is actually my first show that I worked on, and I started as an animator.
My name is William Lau. I'm directing right now, and my position on Beast Wars was editor, and I directed the last few episodes in season 3, I believe.
Hi, I'm Conrad Helton, and currently I'm working as an animation director and sometimes supervising animator. But as with Dustin, we started roughly around the same time and started as a animator. For the first month, I believe, we were both working as modelers, and then moved on to animation for episode 1, season 2.
It's probably similar with these guys as well, but just a lifelong love of animation, and of course Transformers. So it's kind of it was a dream come true at that time, just to be able to pull all the toys out of my closet and actually put them on screen. And I was told that at Emily Carr, where I went before, at the time they were pretty much focusing only on NFB stuff, like National Film Board, kind of government grant kind of stuff, and I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went to more tech school, which kind of made Mainframe a really good option.
Well, when we first started, I think they were wrapping up for season 2, and they got all the new recruits. There was basically, we had an entire, first episode was, I think, entirely brand new animators. I don't know, maybe 20 of us or so were hired around the same time. And they asked us to model, like, I remember modeling Megatron, and having to go into the vault in a special room that was locked off. And we had to go in there and with calipers measure like the little body parts of Megatron and bring them back. And I had the task of animating his forearm, and then someone put it all together. And after that, we just kind of, I think most of us moved on to animation.
Yeah, that's kind of important to know too, is that for season 2 and season 3, the models were actually based as close as possible to the toys, unlike G1, 2D animated, where the cartoon didn't look very much like the toys at all.
Yeah.
Which made it difficult both to model and animate, because the toys aren't super articulate. So yeah, with Megatron, you only had clearance like this for his arms because he had these giant shoulder pads. Excuse me.
Well, I guess working exclusively with Hasbro on this, they would deliver us a script that they've approved, and then from there we would storyboard or make shot lists of the script itself, and we'll make I guess a list of sets and props that we need to make and create for that episode specifically. And then from there, we just make what they call setups, computer or CG setups, where we take the models and put rudimentary sort of composition on them, and just cameras and all that, and just pretty much tell a story like a shadow puppet show in a way, because they didn't really have any articulation or anything, or need a lip sync or anything, just as long as it kind of represents what we want to show. And then we sync that up with audio, which is recorded at I think Dick Rogers at the time up here in Vancouver, and and we just kind of piece it together the show that way.
I think the nice thing about working on Beast Wars was that we did have the script, but it was a bit malleable. Like, we could change things, and the client was Hasbro was really copacetic with it. We had a lot of creative input into the whole process. So
the script would usually say something like "a battle ensues."
Yeah.
And then, it was up to us to kind of figure out what that meant.
Yeah, that was probably the most fun, like just to come up with different stories like that, and just with different ideas. Like, I guess it was like the first time in animation that we were spontaneous. Like, we'd actually make up something on the spot and then do it without any kind of pre-planning, which is really interesting. A very organic way of working, and the shows showed a lot of originality by doing that.
I think the most famous one that we have was this fellow animator Dave Williscroft, who had a fascination with toilets, and I don't know if he called himself that, or he was just kind of, he was dubbed that, but everyone called him Toiletron. And he had probably about 100 toilets all around his desk. And so it was up to him to, put a toilet into not every shot, but every show that he was working on, at least one. Disguised, either have like a texture of the ground, or, or it's exploded or something, as part of an effect.
Fantastic.
One of my favorite ones was Megatron had the dinosaur head when he was still in robot form, and for some reason he had a hot tub in his lair that he'd sit and watch the video screen. And
That's where the spontaneity came from. It was put a hot tub.
It was great. And so in one episode, as he's talking to one of his minions, he's got a toothbrush and he's brushing the teeth of his dinosaur head. They give us a lot of comedic freedom, which is great.
Actually, we also had like a outtake. Actually, one of our the voice actors from Megatron, he actually physically coughed when he was doing a line. We used that for a scene where he was just laughing so hard he made himself cough, and it was like brilliant. It's like so it's kind of neat that we could we have the freedom to do that kind of stuff.
I remember there was one time where Black Arachne was like opening up panels and stuff was falling out and the rubber ducky fell out. That might have been the Froggy French lady.
Oh, perhaps, I don't know. I can't remember.
That was what she called herself, so it's not meant to be a slur.
We were using Softimage, which is the precursor to XSI, and it was pretty good for animation. Like, it was pretty animation friendly. It was before Maya and, as I said, XSI. So
Yeah, Alias was current at that time, but and the models, like I said, because they were made to be as close to the toy as possible, they were really heavy, and computing power back then was a fraction of what it is now. So that it was pretty slow. Like Megatron, I believe, was 200,000 triangles, which isn't maybe a big deal now, but back then it was like, Well, I mean, Transformers are pretty interesting, well, especially these ones, because, they transform into animals, and always, like, bipeds quadrupeds, or even more, like the insect guys. That has a bunch of different challenges to get realistic animal motion. And, of course, the transformations are always unusual, because there's lots of kind of hiding in smoke and mirrors, because, how do you get, like, one giant piece to basically disappear? Those would have been canned off, though. It would have taken a few weeks of one really talented person to animate a transformation, and then that would be reused throughout.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it was quite an art form to get them to transform and look smooth and that. Because like Dustin said, hiding a lot of scaling, like shrinking objects
And they actually transformed how the toy transformed, which I think is actually kind of cool. Like, it wasn't just kind of make it up as you go. Like, they actually had to really go over the mechanics of how the toy worked, so they stuck as close to that as possible.
I think just the trend is, for some reasons, going more photorealistic. Therefore, mocap was sort of the thing that came in afterwards. Beast Wars was completely keyframed, and I think that allowed us to actually add more style to the show instead of having something that was photorealistic. And I think that just added to more fun for the series, I think.
Oh yeah, and they did have a lot of really interesting characters, which is a great thing to, if you have the chance to work on, because the voice actors generally were quite good. Like Jim Burns was one of my favorites. He was the voice of Inferno. And so there was a lot of very unique characters, whereas in a lot of cases with, other franchises, they're very strict with what you're able to do with those characters, whereas we had a lot of freedom to develop character. So as an animator, you can really put a lot of personality in.
I think as well, for us, like for a lot of us, it was our first sort of attempt at animation, and so we were all kind of learning at the same time, and learning, animation techniques and trying to apply principles. Like, we didn't have there wasn't really any squash and stretch, or that much squash and stretch. It's like classical animation in Beast Wars, like everything was kind of, because they were transmetal or whatever, it was more rigid, and so that affected the style as well.
Yeah, which is actually a good thing for an amateur animator, is because generally, animation before it's smoothed out will look somewhat robotic. So in most cases, a first or second pass would actually look how it was supposed to look. But if you're animating a human, you'd have to go further than that.
I guess it's, in a way, it's like watching grass grow. It's, you plant your seeds and then you just kind of wait until the flowers or the, plants start sprouting, and then, because it takes a long time, right? It's not like with an actor, it's all spontaneous. Like, can you try with a little more of this, more of that, and they'll like show it to you right away or something, right? With animator, I guess you gotta almost, you gotta describe it to them in timing as well. So you got 10 frames to do this. Here's an emotion here that we've got to hit this beat, and then the animator will go ahead and do it, and then bring it back, and then we'll cut it into the show, and then we'll just kind of look at it in context with everything, and then we'll decide what amendments we'll make to it. So it's very non-linear in a way. You could go back and fix things and adjust certain performances and I guess stances or even like body language and all that. It's really important in animation, right? It isn't all just performance through what we called Grin at that time, was the lip sync program that we used. There was a lot to do with posing.
I think as well, like at that time, kind of in the infancy of CG animation, because it really was, that there weren't a lot of animation directors. So Mainframe hired a lot of, live action directors. So they came, this was like sometimes their first experience in the CG world and dealing with animators and that. So, there was a whole bunch, like John Poser, Trent Carlson, Cal Schumacher. And so, like, I remember one of the directors, like, he asked me to do a fight sequence of, I think there were like 6 characters, and he said, okay, I just want you to feel, what are they going through, what are the emotions there, and we'll just kind of, first of all, you just animate the whole thing in a wide angle, and then we'll cut in for close-ups. And I was like, as an animator, like, oh my god.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, so I finally convinced him, like, let's not do that. Let's kind of like pick our moments.
Yeah, because the interesting thing comparing live action to animation is that things that are very simple in one are very difficult in the other, and vice versa. Like in animation, it's real easy. Oh, I don't like that mountain, move it over. Or, the sun's in the wrong spot in the sky, move it. But like to have somebody like stand up, walk over and shake somebody's hand and sit down would take quite a while, to keyframe.
So fantastic.
We move mountains.
Yeah.
Shaking hands? No.
Well, I think at the time, like it wasn't as departmentalized as it is now. Like right now we have modeling department, effects department, lighting department, rendering department. Like at that time, I think we did have a modeling department, but we did, incorporate a lot of that. Like people were responsible for their shot from the beginning to the end. Sometimes if you were missing a prop, you'd have to make it yourself. And the same with effects. Like if it was, a unique custom effects. Like so, as a animator slash modeler, everything you get sort of well-rounded. And we were also, under the gun as far as the timeline. Like I think every show was about 8 weeks, roughly, and like a 25-second quota. So that's including everything from beginning to end. So I think it just made you faster and like just a bit more experienced.
Yeah, it was an awesome introduction to the industry because, like Conrad said, we literally started modeling, animated, then lit it, and then in most cases did effects and rendered and comped and everything. So it taught you pretty much the entire, start to finish of the process. And then people, if they specialized, then they could, later on we ended up, going into departments. Anything with Jim Burns' Inferno was a blast to animate because he's always laughing and screaming. But the most memorable for me, I think, would be Megatron, he's like skating because he had wheels on the bottoms of his feet, and he's just kind of like doing this kind of like really lackadaisical kind of ice skating routine. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think it would be Megatron for me. He's just so flamboyant. He just enjoys being himself, and it's wicked.
Right.
I liked Megatron. I also liked Rat Trap just because of his voice acting, because he was just kind of over the top, kind of like this, I don't know, pseudo Bronx sort of voice.
Yeah.
And I remember this one show that we did with one animator, Wade. He actually made Cheater fart in a couple of scenes, and he even had effects, you know, like the little particle effects. They're like, Cheater, whoa, dude.
I'm Gordon Farrell. I'm a senior technical director here at Mainframe, and at the time of Beast Wars, I was doing tech support.
And I'm Dave Faracchia. I'm Vice President of Technology, and way back then, I was a senior software developer.
And I'm Robin Shea, currently a supervising animator. Back when Beast Wars was around, I was fresh out of school and a junior animator.
Let's see, way back when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I was working in the SFU graphics lab, and Dave was one of the people I was working with. And after that, I just took a plain old programming job out in the real world. And when that got really dull, I started poking people I knew here about working in animation. And eventually, something came out of that, and I ended up here, and I've had a great time ever since.
Well, I started animation 20-some years ago. I'm one of the old guys here, as these guys will attest to. I actually started in academia, so I was doing research in computer graphics, both in Canada and the States for a while, and was hired at Simon Fraser University in the end of '92. By 1997, about 90% of the software department at Mainframe were my students. So in '97, they lured me in. So they said they invited me to the dark side, and I never went back.
I was on my way to becoming a police officer. And then saw a wonderful little film. It was Terminator 2. And sat there in awe and tried to figure out, how did they do that? And how can I learn how to do that? From that moment, decided to get into animation. Went to film school locally, and halfway through film school, started to find about this wonderful little company, Mainframe, that was currently doing another series, reboot, and then heard through the grapevine they were going to be doing a Transformers spin-off called Beast Wars. From that moment, halfway through school, I knew I wanted to work here. Basically, from day one of animation, we have a script read-through with the directors. And so we'll go through the script, and one of the most enjoyable parts of it is the director would give each of us a part. And so the animators would sort of vie for their favorite characters. From that, we'd go through the script to get a sense of what was happening, what needed to be built. As animators, we're also expected to model texture and have a full understanding of the software that we're reusing. Sometimes there were limitations in which we called upon the think tank, or the brains of the company, and to provide us with certain software innovations. With the amount of characters in a show, one of the most difficult things was coming up with how to actually get the lip sync from them. And our software department was able to provide us with this version, probably the second iteration, or I guess 1.5 iteration of our proprietary software for lip sync. It allowed us full control over eyes, mouth, nose, anything we needed to actually animate on the character. Having our own software department as well, which is great because turnaround for what we needed was very quick. So if we were limited by the software we were using, generally these gents and their cohorts could, I guess, expand upon what we were given to allow us to give Hasbro and Mainframe the best product that we possibly could. So from the beginning, setting it up, animating, lighting, software in our technical department fully integrated on a daily basis to allow us to complete the shows.
Yeah, our job was really to save production's assets on an ongoing basis. I have to say it, I know.
Yes.
It was such a different time because we had come off of doing the first CG series reboot, which was the first CG series ever aired, and this was the second. And of course, back then, technology was less advanced, although they were graphic workstations. And to give you perspective, you look at the graphics workstations back then, which were Silicon Graphics, And you know, a lower end workstation would cost around the order of about 15 grand. And you look at some of the higher end ones, and you're starting to look at about $75,000 plus for one system.
Yeah, or even up to a $250,000.
Even up to $250,000 for some of the
really
larger
high-end
high-end 4-processor machines. And you look at this perspective nowadays, back then what would have cost you, say, $25,000, now costs you on the order of about $2,500. Will cost you on the order of $75,000, costs you now on the order of about $5,000. And you're looking at a machine now which is at least 10 times more powerful than it was back then. Back then, we were excited when you got 128 megabytes of RAM, maybe 2 processors, and a great graphics card. Well, nowadays you're looking at dual core machines with 2 to 4 gigs of RAM with Skookum graphics cards. Quite amazing. And even in terms of software, this was a time when there were no commercial facial animation systems. There were no commercial asset management systems to be able to track where the data was. There were no commercial render farm systems. So all of that stuff had to be written. And of course, the primary one at the time was facial animation, and Beast Wars really did make it a little more difficult than Reboot because there were talking dinosaurs and there were characters that had mouths that extended all the way back to here, which meant that the software needed to handle expression and allow the animators to create expressions and believable facial animation for those kind of characters. So that was a challenge that actually ended up extending version 1 of Grin, which started in '93, to version 2 of Grin at that time. Now we're actually running version 4 and have an even newer solution, which we can't talk about.
And also at the time, we worked very closely with Softimage, who was our primary software vendor. And we had a dedicated contact person there. And whenever we found a problem with the software, we would talk to her, hi Sylvia, and they would do whatever they could to give us either a workaround for the problem or send us a fix for a bug. And yeah, they were really helpful at the time.
In fact, they still do.
Yes, they
It
still
was
do.
from the actual production floor. As being an animator or a modeling department or our textures, the software department provided us with so many add-ons that over the years they've actually become embedded into Softimage, and even in the iteration of XSI, some of the plugins there, I think, are a result of the efforts at Mainframe. What now takes us a button push. Back when we were doing Beast Wars, there was about a 10-step process. And of course, in animation, we want everything immediately. And not that we tend to be lazy, I'd say we're efficient, or we want to be efficient. So I think we've come a long way even in help develop the software and push the software in ways that perhaps it wasn't headed.
Oh yeah, I mean, the mistake you can make is having, scientists and computer scientists and researchers actually create the software that artists have to use in a vacuum. It just never works. We work very closely and still work very closely, and I think that hopefully that's the norm in industry as well.
Well, we still have not written that MF Animate plugin yet.
Yeah, I click on a button and it
the
makes
one button
everything.
show button.
So luckily we get bribed by the animators and production staff not to write that. So although we have it, that's what I'm saying.
Beast Wars, it was a love of a lot of animating. I think everyone who worked on the series loved it. It was just fun. It was fun to work on. You had creative freedom. Pulling off, Waspinator's arm and beating him with it was allowed. And there's just something that's funny about that. Having Megatron in a tub with a rubber ducky is funny. And as a result, a lot of not only the employees here, but the employees' offspring, if you will, loved the series. And this shirt was actually designed by one of the sons of a gentleman, Steve Sachs, who loved the characters. And I'm trying to think of how old he was at the time. I
think 6.
Yes, 6-ish.
Yeah.
And so he came up with this T-shirt, and everyone loved it. As a result, the entire crew got one, and everybody in the building. So there was a time when everybody was wearing one of these shirts, and the great thing about it is, hey, it's from '97, and I've still got it. I wear it enough, but you put it on, and there's sort of nostalgia. People look at it and go, hey, you worked on that series, and the sort of childlike nature of it just sort of epitomizes what Beast Wars was. It was fun, it was lighthearted, but allowed you the freedom to be creative.
one of the things I loved about the show as well, and it's touching upon what Robin said, is that the show had these complex characters. You had even Optimus Prime, who was very trusting as well, and you had characters like Dinobot, who switched over from the dark side to the good side, but he trusted, but no one else did. And of course, the scene where Dinobot dies, and everyone comes to realize that he really was a good guy, but conflicted, it still gives me goosebumps actually to this day. But there's little known things. I mean, you look at Waspinator, who's actually one of my favorite characters. I used to do his voice, but I'm not going to try it now. Waspinator. And it was so much fun in that show, and it really came from all the animators that had these interesting ideas. And the little known secrets as well, because I think people thought of characters like Rhinox as being really tough and really not having any other maybe comic depth to him. But little known fact that in the evenings he liked to dance. So we've got some footage, if we can find it, of Rhinox doing the Macarena. So when he was out doing this all night long and came to the set and was a little late, no one said anything because no one messed with Rhinox. But little known secrets.
One of the most difficult challenges with Beast Wars was actually composing the shots themselves when they weren't in beast mode but in robot mode. The scale of the characters was enormous, so at times we would find ourselves using different lenses for the background and the characters. How do you get an over-the-shoulder shot of Megatron looking at Rat Trap? The sheer scale is somewhat tricky. When the characters would actually transform, the other trick there is how to make it believable, because all these little pieces have to go somewhere, and you can't just hide and unhide them or magically scale them. And we could actually, if you slow down all those shots and watch, you'll notice that the pieces actually do fit in to probably about a 90% approximation of where the toy does. So it wasn't just do it over 5 frames and barb a trick, and there was your rat or your robot. For that, with the limitations of the software, we had a lot of complex rigs, a lot of objects being scaled and constrained and running expressions to get them to happen. When it was most difficult, though, we would actually have the character leap up and turn in frame. So you'd get this sort of jumping, twisting transformation. And the back was to the camera. That's when the rabbit got hit in the sleeve. So the transformations were tricky. We spent about 2 weeks on each sort of setting them up. We'd have 2 to 3 people. You'd start off with one core animator doing the transformation, and then we'd hand it off and have 2 people looking at it. If we had any difficulties in actually achieving what we needed, again, pick up the phone and ask software, hey, is there some plugin you can write to allow us to constrain multiple objects to a path? And sometimes there were, sometimes there weren't, and that's when we turned the characters back to camera and just was gone. Back when we were using Softimage, you had one camera. One of the beauties now of the majority of software packages, and with us using XSI, is we can throw multiple cameras on a scene. One of the other huge challenges is if the character changed, meaning if the model changed, if Hasbro had some small tweak to make to the model, because we were representing a toy, essentially. So if the color was slightly off or not, it would be a reprocessing of the model, and production would essentially halt, because you don't want to produce footage that you're going to have to render if the model's going to change. Where we are today, our pipeline has changed to, as the software has changed, to allow us to use reference models, which basically means you can make changes all the way up, almost to the last minute, because that change will trickle through every animator on every screen that you've got. The change will update. So, again, through the time that's passed, and with the software department adding to this, it's essentially made the job somewhat easier. And if we were to do Beast Wars today, not only would it look absolutely stunning,
It would have shadows.
Hint, nudge, nudge. It would have shadows. Well, yeah, very good point. Yeah, Season 1 and Season 2, Mental Ray was just, the Mental Ray rendering was just coming in around Season 2, but the tax to actually render it and to do shadows is enormous. And these, you guys can comment on that. To the point when we got into, I believe it was Season 3, when we started to render with shadows. But of course, the industry wasn't there yet, so it was a huge innovation even when we started to do it for TV production. Now, we'd render shadow passes, we'd give you color shadows, we'd give you soft shadows, whatever you want. We can make it look realistic. So I think we're trying to push the envelope, but with the limitations of the software.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest problem, that you look at production software which you can buy, and it's at this stage, if you think of a timeline of the things you can do in computer graphics at that point. Software was here, research in academia was around here, but it was untested, unstable, very researchy.
Not production friendly at all.
And not production friendly at all. And we had to kind of try and bridge the gap up because, and it still happens now, the piece of software may be able to do A at most, but a show is going to demand 8 plus 3, or infinity at times. And it's always a question of how are you going to do it when the software that you purchased can't. And I remember from when VSpheres came in, we actually had to ramp up not only in order to be able to handle the larger number of characters and so on, but actually handle the larger crew, a larger space, more machines, larger network, more storage. And I think at one point in time, there was about 150 different plugins and shaders for the Softimage software that we wrote in software to be able to complement what it couldn't do, including the renderer, and trying to find ways of making it faster because you want to push that technology so you can make something look better, but there is always that risk that are you going to get it done in time? And of course, the answer is we'll always find a way.
I think episodic-wise, for me, it was Transmutate was brilliant. I think the writing was brilliant. I think the story is brilliant. You can watch it today, and it's stunning. The story says a lot. There's a lot of you don't even have to read between the lines. It's just a fabulous story. Characters for me, Silver Bolt. Absolutely. I mean, how can you not like this heroic Black Arachnia? And he's just so prim and proper, and he's a ham. He's great. And then of course Black Arachnia. Any shot that I could get to show off her modeling was great, and the interaction between the two. Silver Bolt really wanted her, but he had to be the gentleman. And I think one of my favorite shots was I can't remember the episode, but this huge sweeping camera, and it was their first kiss, and the camera sort of rotates around. I think it's about 4 times and slowly spirals up, and then as she finally kisses him, she perches up on one leg, and she hugs him in tighter, and then if you look at the bottom of frame, we've got his leg sort of. As I said, the series allowed you to have some fun with it, and I think that was just Silver Bolt.
And it was modeled after one of Robin's fantasies as well, so I think we try it. Gordon?
Back then, it was the first show I ever worked on, and it was my first job in computer animation. So I was sort of thrust in feet first and was basically stuck in my office dealing with bugs. So I didn't really get to see much of the shows. All I got to see was the things that was wrong with the shows.
Medication will make the bugs go away.
That's right.
So I didn't actually get to see much of the show until after it was done. Because my favorite episode would have been one that was actually written by one of the technical people here, Eric Torn, who used to be a tech support person as well, was Master Blaster, the episode where his Cheetor had to take over when Optimus got transformed into
Quick Strike.
Quick Strike.
For my favorite character, it still is Waspinator, because again, it's a voice only a mother could love, and just loved the voice, just loved the acting of that character. In terms of scenes, it had to be Dinobot's death. I remember Robin crying, Gord crying. I maintained my manhood. But again, it was one of those moments where finally everyone came to realize that this character they were very conflicted about, in the end was ready to lay down his life for all of them. And I really did get goosebumps watching them. I thought it was just an amazing scene for something which was a children's show. And I think it really did taught a lot of lessons about teamwork and about life. So